Now, we're supposedly here today to hear the latest chapter in the fairy tale of Supreme Court corruption. As I implied, this is a continued effort to undermine a United States Supreme Court that isn't ruling the way that some of my Democratic colleagues want. How do we know today's outrage is unjustified? Well, at least 4 of my Democratic colleagues, and I suspect many Republicans on this committee, have done exactly what Justice Thomas did: amend their financial disclosures. I'm willing to stipulate that, like Justice Thomas, my colleagues have done nothing wrong intentionally. Amendments are pretty commonplace. According to the Judicial Conference, about which we will probably hear a lot today from this witness, Justice Thomas, in 2011, immediately amended his financial disclosures to include his wife's employers for a number of years. That's it. That's all, folks. That's what this is all about. Of course, everybody knew at the time that Mrs. Thomas worked in politics. And everybody knew at the time that Mrs. Thomas works in policy. So it's pretty unclear what the bombshell is here. Maybe because there isn't one. Justice Thomas either misunderstood or misinterpreted, I don't know, the disclosure obligations. And so in 2011, he filed an amendment, which the law calls for, to tell us what we already knew. The Judicial Conference has a committee on financial disclosure. The Judicial Conference's Committee on Financial Disclosure cleared Justice Thomas. Did I mention? They cleared him. They found no evidence, none, zero, nada, zilch. They found no evidence that he acted willfully or improperly. And as the Judicial Conference told our chairman just 2 days ago, the conference's Committee on Financial Disclosure cleared Justice Thomas not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times at 4 separate points under the leadership of 2 different judges who served as chairman of that committee. Now that ought to be the end of the story. But it turns out that for the last dozen years, a lone federal judge who is with us today has been obsessed with complaining that the Judicial Conference got it wrong. Obsessed. Perhaps he thinks they are crooks too. A few data points on our witness today, Judge Wolf. Number 1, as a sitting federal judge, he wrote in 2021 for NBC News in support of H.R. 1. This was the partisan Democratic bill to federalize elections, to remove them from state and local government. Are federal judges supposed to advocate for policy changes to current law? No. But Judge Wolf did. Number two, the Associated Press has reported that, quote, I'm going to quote now. These are AP's words, not mine. A longtime FBI informant believed that Wolf had leaked information to the mob when he worked for the U.S. Attorney's Office, end quote. Then, as a judge, he refused to recuse himself in a case involving the mob. Number three, a few years later, federal prosecutors accused Judge Wolf of entertaining a defense witness in a murder trial. Are you kidding me? A highly unethical move, that's an understatement, at Martha's Vineyard, which led to his recusal to avoid the potential for appearing biased after he'd been 15 years into the case. Talk about an inefficient use of scarce judicial resources. Now, this is the Judge Wolf whom we're going to hear from today. A self-described nonpartisan interested in fair judicial administration. The proceedings of the Judicial Conference are highly confidential. The proceedings of its Financial Disclosure Committee are confidential too. Multiple advisory opinions and even the Judicial Code of Conduct say that a sitting judge should only testify before a partisan body if they are an expert. And yet Judge Wolf is going to tell us all about them, even though he didn't even sit on the committee that investigated Justice Thomas. As the Judicial Conference emphasized, professional, non-political career staff of the Judicial Conference's Financial Disclosure Committee viewed Justice Thomas's amended disclosure and called it what it was, routine. But the judgment from nonpartisan staff and from the committee's Democrat, not Republican, but Democrat-appointed head didn't satisfy Judge Wolf. He continued on. And he eventually tried to force a vote at the Judiciary Conference. Obsessed. Why? For the same reason that some Democrats keep holding public smear campaigns like this one. Judge Wolf wasn't getting his way from the head of the Judicial Conference or from Chief Justice Roberts himself. Ethics experts and fellow judges agreed that there was no there. But maybe the press could be convinced that even when there's no smoke, there's fire. We've never seen that happen in Washington. Apparently, someone convinced the press to swallow Judge Wolf's line. As of 2 weeks ago, you can read the play-by-play of how Judge Wolf repeatedly and unsuccessfully pressed the Judicial Conference to bend to his will in a Bloomberg article written more than a decade after the fact. By the way, the Judicial Conference says that, quote, judges should not discuss pending or impending cases, confidential information, or controversial matters with the media. The media revelation is interesting, not because it demonstrates any wrongdoing on the part of either Justice Thomas or Chief Justice Roberts. None. But because it implies wrongdoing on the part of its possible source. Possible source. the information leaked to this reporter is highly confidential. And if it was leaked by a sitting judge, it was unethical. In other words, this hearing, we're here to focus on potential ethical lapse. Could it be that this hearing is only possible because of a clear ethical lapse? I wish some of my Democratic friends, and they are my friends, and Judge Wolf were as concerned about this leak as they are about routine and proper disclosure amendments. And by the way, anyone who wonders why appropriate confidentiality can be so crucial to our legal system and to the safety of the men and women on the bench can give Justice Kavanaugh a call. Just ring him up. Leaking confidential information to affect an outcome or get your way is always wrong. And sometimes it's dangerous. So why does the nauseously woke left to continue to employ these tactics? That's a fair question. We got the answer in New York Magazine. New York Magazine told us 2 days after the Bloomberg piece on Judge Wolf's advocacy was published. I want to read to you the magazine's advice. Quote, "It is therefore in the interest of the progressive movement to undermine the court's legitimacy. It makes sense for progressives to publicize Thomas's obscene indulgences. But I think it's true that the end goal of doing so isn't to secure ethics reforms that will render the Supreme Court less vulnerable to perceptions of corruption. The point is, or at least it should be, to promote the perception of judicial corruption." End quote. If you can't control it, you burn it down. Like others, Judge Wolf's goal seems to me to be political. This hearing has been entirely structured around him. Entirely. Who has, as a supposedly nonpartisan federal judge, endorsed partisan legislation has been the catalyst and the only witness for a partisan hearing. Is Judge Wolf planning on launching a super PAC next? So let me sum it up. More than 10 years ago, Justice Thomas amended his financial disclosures to include facts that everyone already knew, which he had inadvertently, I shouldn't say inadvertently, I don't know, omitted. People file amendments all the time. Both Democrats and Republicans on this committee have repeatedly done the same thing. I don't hold that against them. And neither should anyone here. This routine amendment resulted in a bureaucratic knife fight that Judge Wolf instigated against a Supreme Court justice and the Judicial Conference. He lost resoundingly 4 times. Did I mention that? He lost 4 times. And here he is a dozen years later to tell us all about it. Even when the facts vindicate the accused, the nauseously woke left can't help but sling mud, especially when it comes to the Supreme Court. If we can't control it, let's burn it down. Forget innocent until proven guilty. The Loon wing of the left insists that good justices are guilty even after they've been found innocent 4 times. And that's the perpetual political carousel that brings us here today. It makes me want to gag.